All right. We cannot talk about the 13 Holy Nights without mentioning someone named Rudolf Steiner. So, Rudolf Steiner actually is someone who is very much associated with the Waldorf school system. Some of you might be familiar with that. And it's a more kind of what we call an alternative way of education that is very aligned with and connected to nature and science. So that doesn't do it justice, but that's just a little bit of information there. And then we also have some other more specifics to share about Rudolf. So he is attributed to being Austrian for most of his life, although he was born and spent time in other countries. But I just want to mention, just so you can notice when he was born, 1861, and died in the early 1920s. So this is a very long time ago, right? He is the founder of something known as anthroposophy. And yes, I looked that up to be sure I was pronouncing that correctly. So I've heard of this before, and basically it is the path of a spiritual foundation of beliefs. And in general, what I love about it, and I'm going to actually define it a little bit more in the next bullet, but it really connects you to your spirituality and your intuition with your world that you're living in. So it's very both sciencey and practical as well as spiritual. So that's why I love the 13 Holy Nights. It can really meet people, even if you don't feel religious. I think the word holy sometimes throws people. So we're going to talk about that too. But he himself was a scientist, spiritualist, philosopher, writer, and editor. And the other part of this is, like I just said, anthroposophy is defined as wisdom of the human being. And it's, again, like I mentioned, the Waldorf education, okay, reference. Some other things to know. I love this quote. Rudolf Steiner developed the anthroposophic lifestyle in which health is a combination of mind, body, and spiritual balance. Now, at his time, that was kind of a newer concept. For a lot of us now, that's not so new. A lot of us hear a lot about and even want to maintain for ourselves the mind-body connection. Okay, so that's another way to go into this. Again, science and nature are very important, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And that he also really said that spirituality is indeed accessible to the human experience, so that we can be more integrated with our spiritual practices, more in touch with our intuition, that it doesn't have to be, as complicated as a lot of people seem to make it. Okay. So those were some of his contributions. I want to take a moment to mention that I'm going to expand more on how he's connected to the 13 Holy Nights and how that connection came to be. But I will say that he also was a mystic in his own right. And so he brought a focus on astrology as well to the 13 Holy Nights, which I'm going to mention a little bit more in the next screen. Okay. So also needing to be mentioned is the 13 Holy Nights origin is pre-Christian times. I think a lot of us are aware. I know that I was not aware of this when I was younger. I grew up in a Catholic home, and I didn't know necessarily that a lot of our traditions in the religious sense, right, were derived from what we might know today as pagan holidays or rituals, or just rituals more aligned with nature and natural rhythms. And so this might not shock many of you to hear that while the 13 Holy Nights did become a religious experience for certain groups, okay, and I'll explain that in a moment, it primarily started as, let's get quiet this time of year. Nature is turning inward. The leaves are falling. The spirituality is deeper because a lot of people are in their homes with themselves a little bit more and more often, right? And so this is where this time became more reflective and, again, aligned with the natural cycles. Animals are hibernating, right? Now, take our modern culture and, not so long ago, what do we normally see? And I know that I grew up with this kind of more hustle and bustle with gotta buy presents for the holidays. And this is really, again, whatever you celebrate, it can get really hectic. Let's stretch ourselves thin. This is why we have a lot of people getting ill around this time of year as well. So again, it's coming back to basics in a way, but it is considered an ancient ritual. This is something that, with the second bullet here, original traditions did vary. And so with the religious, because of the timing of this ritual, which was generally from about the winter solstice, or even with some traditions, Christmas Eve, to early January, in Christian traditions, it was between the birth of Jesus and what something is called the Epiphany, okay, which is a religious holiday. So as you can imagine, and even as you look at this coming time of year, right? We have Christmas, we have Diwali. I have several Hindu friends, so I celebrate Diwali every year as well with them. And I have a lot of Jewish friends. We have Hanukkah, we have Boxing Day and so there's all of these different expressions, Kwanzaa, that have come out of this time. No one is wrong, but here's the key, and you're going to hear me talk about this again. It's what your intention is, right? What you're wanting from the season and what feels supportive for you. But I love that, again, in the pagan cultures and when this first started, it was just simply a time where people were really in tune with the power of their intuition, the power of intention. And as the year was ending, they wanted to reflect on what they had learned, what they'd been through and experienced, and bless what was coming. And I think that that's so awesome. This was always considered a sacred time to turn inward. So again, whether you have a religious practice or not, or even a mix of things, it can be a very sacred time. And that's a huge point. These last two bullets I just want to mention, again, like I just said, the reflection with the lessons of the past is a part of the 13 Holy Nights ritual. And the reflection of tension, the seeds for the future, is a big other part of this practice. Okay. So I want to talk next. I'm going to take the slides off for a moment about the basics of the Holy Nights ritual. Okay. So the 13 Holy Nights are said to happen between December 24th and its sunset through January 6th. And so wherever that falls, however it falls, it is sunset to sunset. And within each of those 24-hour segments, so sunset December 24th to sunset December 25th, you are invited to focus on what do you need to know about the coming new year. Then during the second Holy Night, from sunset on December 25th until sunset December 26th, you are looking for impressions and information for January of the next new year. On the third Holy Night, from December 26th sunset into December 27th sunset time, you are then looking for impressions for February of the next new year. So it goes on like this. And I say impression because anything that comes across your path, anything that inspires you or feels significant, that is all part of what you are writing in your journal, and what will help you create the oracle part, the guidance part, when you actually are in those months in real time in the next new year, and reflecting on what you wrote, what came up during that window. And that's actually the kind of neat and magical part about all of this as well. So that's why there's 13, because we have 12 months in a calendar year, but the first night is focused on the overall year. So what do I mean when I say you're focusing on it? So these are the main components of the ritual. And there's variation. There's you making it your own, which I really love about this as well. The idea is that you claim quiet, sacred space. Now, for me, this doesn't have to be your thing. I'm a big altar girl. I love lighting candles. I like gemstones. And that might not be your thing, and it doesn't have to be, but that's my form of quiet. That's my form of sacred. Now, I live alone, except with the dog. So I actually get a lot of quiet space. Whereas Jim, I love you. You might not always have that with two young kids, right? And you always have the choice to take 5 minutes, even if it's in the bathroom, you guys. And I'm not kidding. So when I'm saying the sunset to sunset thing, it's this window of sacred and intuitive time where you are focusing on, for example, the next new year for the first night. And so the ways you're invited to do that is not only sitting in the sacred undisturbed space, even if it's 5 minutes, some people spend 30 minutes or an hour. It's up to you. Maybe one night you do have 10 minutes, the next night you have 2 or that hour. Okay. But you're trying to listen and get input intuitively. So some of you might have a practice of oracle cards and tarot cards. Some people like to use runes. Some people channel and they just sit and listen and write. Okay. But the idea is that you open up spirit world, team, whoever you believe in, if it's angels, fairies, God, spirit, mystery, nature, universe, whatever it is, that you are asking for information. It's like turning on the switch, amplifying the intuition. Because I know a lot of you are aware of this, but we heighten the magic when we listen. And one of the things that I was thinking about with this is actually a great example. How many of you realize that when you go grocery shopping, there's music playing? Right? And so here's the thing. Sometimes, and I could tell you right now, I go in and I couldn't even tell you what was playing. Other times I'm actually listening. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're playing this song that I love and I'm jamming in the aisle, whatever. But a lot of times I'm not even tuning in or listening. There's a lot going on. That's such a great metaphor for our lives. When we stop and listen, and even just going for a walk, if that's meditative, even if you like to sit on a cushion and meditate, again, if you pull cards or if you have gemstones or other ways of getting this input, because the idea is that for that 24-hour period, you are invited to notice what dreams you have. So the next morning, what did I dream about? Even if it doesn't make sense, you write it down. You have that song, we call it an earworm, right? That song that gets in your head that you can't get rid of. And I have a story about that. It might be, oh my gosh, this friend called me. I haven't talked to him or her in like 5 years. It was so wild. You write these things down because this is your observation. This is your witnessing. Even when you think not much happens, minimally you're asking. So you might be looking at cards. You might be following other ways of receiving this information. Does this make sense so far? It's really a beautiful just way to be. And yes, it's a form of mindfulness. The wild part you don't usually expect can be what you're writing then for that night. You're like, I don't know what the heck this means. Whenever we put focus on something or welcome something, okay, you're going to just notice more activity. And because you're listening, just like being in the grocery store and saying, oh, what song's playing? You're going to turn that up for yourself in the ways of receiving information intuitively. Now, I just want to also say, side note, that intuition is different for all of us. Some of us have those really vivid movie-like dreams, or we meet someone and we have like this warm feeling, or we want to vomit, whatever it might be. All of those ways, or we just hear something, right? All of those are ways that we receive information from the spirit world, from deceased loved ones, from our own inner guidance. So I want you to stay open to the different forms that it can come in. But what if I'm traveling? Guess what? I can't tell you how many people travel during the holidays, but they say this is so easy to bring with me. Or even just they bring gemstones, or just taking a moment. And what a great practice to have this with you no matter where you are. I find that it's going to be really supportive for you. So I like having that. But what if I'm not super fond of writing? You can write a very little bit just to report in, but again, you can draw. You can, just use other means. You can just write down cards you pull or things you see. It doesn't have to be long prose if that's not your thing. And I have so much going on. How do I freaking have time for this? I hear you. And how do we not make time for this? Because for me, it's balance, and it can be 2 minutes some days. And maybe you add to more the next day. It doesn't have to be done in one sitting either, right? It just becomes that priority. So I find that that's really helpful. So I just want to thank you. Look at this beautiful scene of trees.